first, I want to introduce you to the final speaker of this afternoon, Lucy Adams. Now, as Managing Director of Firehouse and a founding partner of Disruptive HR, Lucy challenges and supports organisations to bring 21st century approaches to leadership, management, organisation and engagement. Now, Lucy was the BBC's HR director during one of its most turbulent periods where, during her 5-year tenure, she saw 4 Director Generals come and go. She oversaw the move to the Salford site and coped with some very public crises, including executive payoffs and the Savile scandal. She has some interesting experiences to share. Please do give Lucy Adams a very warm welcome.
So, good afternoon. It's lovely to be here. And I should say, first of all, that I am a real fan of further education. I grew up in Twickenham, where we didn't have sixth form, so I went to a further education college. I have to say, I don't remember doing a huge amount of education. There was a lot of smoking in the common room. Yes, it's that long ago. And then actually my second job on leaving university was working in a further education college. Albeit briefly, I was really bad, a really, really bad teacher. Is there anybody here from Harrogate College? Is there anybody here? Because that's where it was. It was a, pardon? Oh, they've got an Ofsted in. What are the chances of that? Probably fairly high. So I'm here to talk about not my disastrous student years and disastrous jobs I've had. I'm here actually to talk about my time at the BBC, which, yeah, I suppose it could fall into that camp as well, no. And to try and just share with you some of the changes that we've been through and my views, having seen leadership up close during some of those very difficult period over that 5 years, and just to share some of that stuff with you in terms of my views of what I saw, the good, the bad, and the really ugly of leadership. And, you know, you might think actually media, further education, there's not a huge amount of parallels. But I suspect actually there is an awful lot of parallels between what you're going through, have gone through, and will continue to go through, and the BBC. Just to go through some of the changes that we experience. I mean, I imagine most of you will watch television, and there are a few of you in the audience old enough to remember the days when there was BBC One, BBC Two, ITV and Channel 4, and then you would have to sit on the sofa next to your mum and dad and make sure you were waiting for your favourite programme to come on. Yeah, that was the reality. 4 channels, and if you missed your favourite programme, you didn't know how to work the video recorder, then you were stuck. I recently picked my daughter up from travelling for a year, and you know, after she said, hello, Mum, the second thing she said was, have I got Netflix in my room because I need to binge watch Vampire Diaries season 2 all weekend? And I thought, you have no idea how lucky you are. There is just so many changes in the way that people consume media, the way that we consume media. We binge watch, we dual screen, we time shift our viewing, and of course all of those changes have meant massive implications for the way that media is produced, it's distributed, commissioned and so on. And that of course means changes for our people. The other changes we saw in that time were real differences in who the competition were. It used to be ITV was the old enemy. Who won Christmas Day? That was what it was all about. Who won Christmas Day, and then also who won 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. So it was eyeballs for those two key points. Well, these days the competition are new broadcasters, Sky, Al Jazeera, and so on. But it's also the Googles and the YouTubes and the Amazons and Netflix. How many people here have watched Netflix, have got Netflix at home? Yeah, it's amazing. You would have asked that, what, 5 years ago? No hands would have gone up. What about Amazon? How many of you have got Amazon? Yeah, again, increasing. But the interesting thing is that these competitors are also partners and suppliers. So the BBC couldn't afford to do the bid for the Grand Prix on its own, so it goes into partnership with Sky, who is a major competitor. we couldn't afford to do the third series of Ripper Street in the way that we wanted to. So we co-produced that and struck a deal with Amazon, whereby Series 3 went to Amazon viewers first and then came onto the BBC. And that just requires a kind of shift, because these organisations, we used to have very clear, easily defined, fairly binary views. They were the competition. And now it's much more sophisticated and much more nuanced than that. And as leaders, we have to manage our way through it. The other changes we saw were these moves to a much more networked and collaborative world. So two of the tribes, which I'll talk a little bit about later, but two of the tribes at the BBC, television, online, kind of two warring tribes. The television guys are the kind of the media elite, you know, the Brahmin. They have the big budgets, and they have the sexy guests, and they have you know, kind of private members clubs, memberships, and they have the beanbags in their offices, at least the days when we had offices. You know, they're the kind of sexy lot, and the technologists were literally seen as the techies. So you'd get, you know, media exec, make me a website for my hugely successful show. Well, these days, that whole relationship has had to change. It's no longer a subservient relationship. The guys, the bearded wonders that we recruited from Google and Apple and so on, you know, they were saying to the television guys, you know, you are dead, you are just like dinosaurs, you know, the future is all about mobile, it's all about dual screening, no one's going to be watching television anymore. And of course, both were right and both were wrong. The reality is that they had to work together. And so we were looking almost at sort of like a marriage guidance style approach to get these people to work more collaboratively. The days when you would have gone to Glastonbury, if you were lucky enough to get a ticket, and you'd have seen the crew from BBC 3, the crew from Radio 1, the crew from Radio 2, the crew from online. Those days are gone. A, because it just can't be afforded, but also the audiences want a very different type of experience, so they want it to be much more joined up. They don't want these kind of different experiences. But getting those tribes to work together can be really, really tricky. And that's the role of leaders in this very, very changing world, and certainly the experiences that we had in the BBC and you will no doubt be having. We had immense structural change in the period that I was there. How many of you have had the opportunity to visit Media City in Salford, down by Salford Quays? A few of you. It's fantastic. If you haven't been, it's really worth going. It is an amazing, amazing setup there. And now, these days, actually attracting people to work there or to move from London or other places in the UK actually is not too difficult, because it looks amazing. You've got children's there, you've got sport there, you've got Radio 5 Live, you've got breakfast and so on. You've got these amazing sort of body of productions already up there. But in the days when we were trying to sell it to people, and particularly to try and sell it to those people who we wanted to move from the south, and you take them up there, and we were on Salford Quays in this kind of Mad Max post-apocalyptic scene with the wind going sideways and the mud and the dirt, and you'd be saying, it's going to be great, it's going to be phenomenal. In fact, one of my team was responsible for answering queries for people who were moving north. And my favourite one was she took a phone call from a quite distraught lady who worked in BBC Children's, who said, I can't possibly go north, I'm a vegetarian. Just gives you a little insight into the kind of somewhat London-centric culture that certainly used to exist in the BBC, not so much now. But there was a vision there. There was a vision for Salford, and I'll come back to that later. Because if you're trying to move production out and you're trying to work in different ways, then actually having some sense of what this thing was going to look like, and the fact that people who had media skills and who were born in the north didn't have to go south for the first time in their career, first time in their lives, that's a phenomenal thing. So, structural change. What other changes did we have? Financial change. Licence fee deal struck a few years ago, £700 million off the cost base. And when a third of your costs are staff related, then it goes to pension reform, and it goes to terms and conditions, and it goes to pay constraint. And it also went to the heart of the deal that had been in existence between the BBC and their people for some decades, which was quite paternalistic, which was, we won't pay you very much, but what we will do is look after you. So if you get made redundant, or if you are in your retirement, we will look after you. Quite a paternalistic culture. And those financial constraints are not just about job losses and changes to terms and conditions. They're about striking at the heart of that, leading to a huge amount of conflict and unrest. And then there were the changes with public scrutiny, social media, and the Jimmy Savile crisis, and all of what that does to leaders who are trying to take an organisation through it. Leaders who are having to wrestle with the challenges of getting people to do more for less, work in different ways, with new technology. Really, really tough. And that's why there are parallels between further education and the BBC, because these are things that you are all going through too. So why is it really hard? There are loads of books on why change fails, and you'll be familiar with a lot of them. But from my experience, when it went wrong, it was usually down to a number of things, 3 or 4 things. We always hear that you have to have a clear vision and a clear strategy. And I think, absolutely we would see that. I mentioned that Salford actually was a huge success, in part because it had that mission. I love what Ian said, that nobility, that noble vision, that it was about taking the BBC to places in the country who had not seen themselves on television, who had not heard their accents on television, who had not seen the places where they lived on television. That was really important, that distributed model. It had a nobility of purpose. It was very, very clear in what it was trying to achieve. And the leadership team bought into that. They were absolutely clear on the purpose for Salford. What was that actually about? Serving audiences in the north. And so it's proved to be. Audience approval levels in the north are now at the average or higher than the average, whereas before they were significantly below. Absence of a vision and a strategy when we were trying to deliver the financial consequences and implications of the licence fee deal, much more challenging. There really wasn't a shared vision about what the BBC needed to be, needed to look like, in part because it's almost impossible. For every person that says, let's get rid of local radio, there are 10 other people who are saying, no, you can't possibly get rid of local radio. Let's actually get rid of Radio 3. No, you can't get rid of Radio 3. I love it. It's the reason I pay my licence fee. In many ways, and I imagine similarly for you, is that you provide services and you've been successful. So where do you actually cut? What do you actually take away from people if it's wanted? A lack of vision that took itself to the senior management team, and we saw these behaviours, these appalling behaviours on occasion, where people were just simply about protecting their turf, not thinking about the bigger picture of the BBC. It was about protect my tribe, my budget. That tribalism, I think, is the second piece that in lots of organisations that I work with today and have worked with in the past, where that is the dominant piece, where if you go to your leadership meetings and you don't want to bring your biggest problem to that table because the lack of trust that is there. The BBC is and still is today, in many ways, awash with tribes. And some of that is good because it drives competition, it drives ambition, it drives a desire to do even better. But when actually you are more interested in beating each other than you are about doing what's right for your organisation in terms of the bigger piece, then it's problematic. And as leaders, we have to tackle that tribalism. The other piece where change often fails is where you are so good that you don't believe you need to. And the BBC was this slight weird mix of in many ways, kind of quite low self-esteem on certain issues, and in others, quite an arrogance. I remember when the first time that Downton Abbey was aired, and we had our board meeting on the Monday, and we talked about Downton Abbey, and there was a kind of dismissing. It was it's a soap opera. There is a real risk when you have that sense of we are really successful, we are really good at what we do, that you don't have that challenger brand mentality. And I think on occasion we lost that, and I think therefore we found change much, much harder. And the other simple reason why change is really hard, and this is where the job of leaders, in my view, really comes in, is that human beings are programmed to resist change. There's a brilliant model that sort of light bulb moments for me, called the SCARF model. Have any of you heard of the SCARF model? If I can see a show of hands. The SCARF model is written by a guy called Dr. David Rock. He is a neuroscientist, and he talks about the threats that are present when we are at work. And those 5 threats relate to the word SCARF. Very, very briefly, what happens is that when we're confronted by these threats that relate to changes that are going on for us, what happens is that part of our brain that is about fight, flight, or freeze gets flooded with blood. And we go into that kind of instinctive reaction mode. We sulk, we stamp our feet, we hide, we go into denial. All of the fight, flight, or freeze things, responses that you'll see from your people when you're going through difficult times. And the part of the brain that is about leaning in and problem solving and lateral thinking shuts down. And those 5 threats are threats to status. At the BBC, we had 20,000 people and 5,500 job titles. Now, we don't have 5,500 different jobs, but what we had was people taking on an extra bit of a title because it gave them a greater sense of status. In many ways, people are more interested in status than they are in financial reward. What you're potentially about to go through with potential mergers really goes to the heart of some of that deep-rooted personal threat to my status. I was the chair, I was the principal. Really tough, really tough. The second piece is C, and that stands for certainty, fairly obvious. We all want certainty, we all want clarity about the future. A is for autonomy. There's been plenty of research that suggests that actually we are more interested in autonomy than we are in money. The ability to do things my way. You try bringing in hot desks. Many of you have, I'm sure, and you see the reactions that you have. The desire to control our own environment, to do things in the way that we want to do them, is so strong in us humans. I once worked in the rail industry, and we got rid of offices. And I went down to the Derby depot, and I said, "Oh, where's Mark?" He was the depot leader, and they said, "Oh, he's in his office." I said, "Well, he can't be in his office. We haven't got any offices." They said, "Oh, no, he's built his own." And he'd built, and because he was an engineer, rail engineer, this was bloody brilliant. It was like archive boxes that he created his own space. So desperate was he to create that autonomy. As humans, we are programmed to want autonomy, and anything that threatens that part of that brain, fight, flight, or freeze, kicks in. R is for relatedness. That's our tribe. They're the people we like. We feel good. We get rewarded in our brains when we're with people we like. We lean in, we problem solve, we think laterally. When we're confronted with people who aren't of our tribe, that's really scary. That's really scary, really threatening. And finally, the F in SCARF is for fairness. Either a sense of fairness to ourselves or fairness to somebody that we care about. And if that's threatened, again, we react, those animals. So that's why change is hard. And you as leaders have got the role of helping people dealing with instinctive reactions. Really tough. And I want to share in closing a model, and forgive me because it sounds really patronizing. It's the ABC of managing change. But it's a helpful framework for me, and it's based on, I wish I could say it was actually based on lots of success in managing change, but actually a lot of it is based on what my daughter would call epic fail. Witnessing things that people have done well, but equally, and perhaps in many ways more importantly, leaders that I've seen, and I've done myself really badly. So ABC for how we manage change. The great leaders that I've seen do this really well. First of all is they know their audience. They know the people that work for them. They truly understand them. They understand their threat hierarchy. What are the things that are going to be most painful for them? And they help them through it. They are the kind of football managers where they don't adopt a one-size-fits-all. They tailor their approach to help their people, and they truly spend the time understanding what their needs are and how they're going to be able to help through this change. The B stands for being yourself better. You know, we hear this big stuff around authentic leadership and how it's all about, you know, we've got to kind of have breakdowns on stage and, you know, we'll burst into tears and so on. I think it's actually much more subtle than that. The great leaders I've seen were themselves but better, be themselves better. And that for me was things like humility, just asking the question, saying, I don't know, what do you think? I got it wrong. They were visible. On the day after George Entwistle, the Director General, who was there for 54 days and who is one of the most decent and amazing men I've ever worked with, but was fired, resigned as a result of the Savile crisis, the guy who took over went down onto the newsroom floor. Now, Naga is here and clearly knows the newsroom floor. There are leaders who would rather go to Gaza and Kabul outposts than go onto the newsroom floor. It's terrifying, it's big, it's filled with journalists that hate management. It's not a happy place for managers to go. But the first thing he did was to go down onto that floor and to go to the Newsnight team who saw themselves responsible for what had happened to George. And he was visible and he took their anger and their upset and their fears. Amazing, courageous leadership, visible, storytellers, those leaders that can kind of tap into their stories. Greg Dyke, arguably one of the most popular, charismatic, amazing leaders the BBC had. Not a fact, not an EBITDA slide in his repertoire. Stories, a vision of how it was going to get better. Being yourself better. And the final thing that the leaders do that I think is that if nothing else, is focusing on the customers. The C is for customers. For the BBC, it was our audiences, and where we were able to make a compelling case that if we do this, it will be better for audiences. By and large, the change was easier. And so for all of those difficult moments that you're going to have, it's the leader's responsibility to remind that you're in this for your students, that you're in these for your parents, for your communities, and keep thinking about the connection back to that. That's what the great leaders do that I've witnessed. And finally, because I think we can hear a lot about sophisticated leadership capabilities and skills and read Harvard Business Review and feel terribly inadequate. But actually, when we had the Savile crisis and the organisation was in a really bad way, and we spent a lot of time, and we spoke to about 1,800 people who worked at the BBC and had worked at the BBC, and we asked them to talk about their bad experiences, and we asked them to talk about their good experiences. And we said, who are the leaders that you would get out of bed for? Who are the leaders that that inspire you, that you love working with? And these 50 names came up, and we said, and what is it that they do? And it wasn't actually very sophisticated. What they said was, they know my name, they ask me how I am, they ask me my opinion, their door's open, they remember the name of my dog, wife, girlfriend, / etc. Human stuff. And that's what I think it's really important to hang on to during times of change, is that humanity. Thank you very much. Thank you.